precept, right? We're kind of going off of.
I sent you that song about how she talks about the presence being what we live for.
Yeah. And then, so like the Christian or charismatic Christian conception of the presence of God. Got a lot of laps around this myself. Because I remember well, so when this goes a bit into the other one, but it's fine. When I like really had like my before and after moment with in terms of like following God, it was, an experience of the presence of basically a supernatural entity, interacting physically with. I remember it felt like peace kind of invading my torso. I was like, thought peace was like, this so careful, it's kind of, but it like invaded, and it was just like a really profound, like, whoa. And remember, I was heading down out of that meeting down to where the youth were gathering. I was 14 doing this. Was with, two other, I guess, young adults. I hadn't really gotten to know a lot, but all of us were still laughing. There was just like, it was a bit strange. And I just kept like, I had a really vivid sense of God being near, even though like, we're playing really, just like jumping down on mattresses and stuff, but I was like, oh God, so I had to like step aside, and just sat there and had like an inner dialogue, like, okay, if you're this real, you're not just a really important concept or really important, like God will come and check in on you every once in a while, but like really there. And I was like, okay, if you're this real, then I think that what you say about yourself is real, in the book. And if that is real, then you've given everything to me. So I want to give everything to you. And that was like a real, yeah. But then, I remember, I think the day after there was like a fire tunnel, which I thought was weird, but like not super weird, just like, why is this guy like drunk or high or something? Why does he behave that way? It's like, oh, it's just, God is, like, sure. Didn't really experience anything. So that's kind of like, and throughout like years of Bible school and I've constantly held these two thoughts of like, you can just have like part of it's physiological, like some songs just on the radio, completely secular songs. You're just like, these are, and that's kind of what you're going at. Like, they're beautiful. They're spiritual. And I even heard my
religious even.
Huh?
Religious even. Well, that's what I would say.
Depending on your definition, but yeah, no, I get that. I remember my pastor even saying like, well, there's, certain songs that aren't Christian, but you're just like, oh, I think the Holy Spirit was involved with this anyway, because I feel this sense, which I thought was like, because it creates so many other problems theologically.
Like what?
Huh?
Like what?
The fact that the Holy Spirit can cause someone to do something for not God's glory. and for no like direct, you know, mission accomplished
But you're
goal.
talking about someone being inspired or feeling like God is present
Yeah.
when through a secular song, basically, right?
No, because I think God can use anything to interact
Mm.
with people. So like he can use a bag blowing in the wind, he can use, an animal jumping in a certain way, or, influence people to do. Um, so like there's a big difference between God using something secular and God, forever linking his presence with
Mm.
a piece of work.
Mm.
So that
Okay.
categorically this is like a God thing
Mm.
rather than, God choosing to speak through a certain way, which he can do through anything.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So like how my pastor was saying, certain songs are just like inspired. I'm
Mm.
like, eh.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So I've always had this thing of like, there's a physiological reality to this where, and I've actually like pondered this a lot, and uh, I've noticed emotions being expressed is almost is very closely related, correlated with having the chills, having like these wow, the goosebumps. And I've been trying to find this one YouTube video where it was just like someone really belting out like from their soul, and I was like, you have instant chills, and all the comments like, wow, this is such a, and I'm like, I would love to have that video as just like an example I could show to charismatic Christians,
Mm.
to just like sober it down a little, that like, not all experiences are evidence that God is,
Mm.
and but even just, going to a lot of worship sets, you kind of, yeah, obviously it is the Stephanie Gretz singer, that's where you
Mm.
get the chills.
Mm.
Um, it's the really, and it's like, because I think it's an empathetic skill to just like pick up on someone truly
Mm.
expressing emotion. And it is a big difference between someone singing emotionally and someone really just like expressing from their heart. And I think you can pick that up if you're listening to all sorts of live music.
Mm.
Someone who really just, ah. Um, and actually, along with that, there is a video that I do have a link to, which is a guy doing like a short video essay, like 11 minutes or so, about no contact martial arts. Are you
Right.
familiar with those?
Yeah, you showed me this video.
Okay, yeah. So to where you can just like
Mm.
gather
Yeah, the
up
whole
this
discussion
this
about it.
nervous energy, and
Yeah.
then that's what I think is a lot of fire tunnel, a lot of drunk stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Not all of it though, which is where it gets interesting. But it's this, you build up an expectation inside yourself, and then once someone, touches your forehead, you just like you release that pent up thing,
Mm.
and yeah, it's muddies the waters a lot.
Right.
Um, and so when the specifics you asked me was like, um, uh, yeah, is hype emotionalist presence experience bad? Should it be avoided? Should it at least not be pursued? And I'm like, probably the last one, like it shouldn't be pursued,
Mm.
because it's like, sure, let's use that example. You're getting to know someone and you want them for sex, right? It's like, and obviously sex is part of an intimate, close relationship. Like, it fits in kind of.
Mm.
but that as a goal is just so like it's not conducive to a good relationship. So I think pursuing, if you're pursuing miracles for miracles' sake and you don't really care about knowing Jesus, then also it's like, yeah, it's probably not going to work out too well. You're probably not going to have, like, it's probably not going to lead to good things. You'll probably, get just as fascinated by witchcraft as the Holy Spirit. You're just, if your main goal is something other than knowing God, then yeah, I think you're setting yourself up for going off.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I have some responses to to that boatload of interesting comments. Okay, where to start? Yeah, where to start, man? So I also asked you about whether there is a difference physiologically between a presence experience that God is in and a presence experience that God is not in.
Right.
And you said there is a physiological difference.
I'd say there
That's your
might be.
hypothesis.
And I'm saying that God can manifest exactly like the physiological, but then I haven't heard too much about the non-hype God experiences being emulated by, drugs and stuff. So like, those deep moments of grief and repentance, or just, this awe, just being in awe of God. Sometimes like after meetings, I think after Benny Hinn or something, where like just spontaneous worship was going off in the Civic, and like after a while we just like sat there. It was this holy, peace or something. Yeah, I don't know about too many of those experiences in the secular environment.
Well, but I also asked you about whether I wouldn't be an example of that with my having left the faith, because
Right.
the idea is that
And that's where I got curious. Have I said that I don't think you ever experienced God?
Well, I remember that's
because I was unsure, actually.
yeah, we had I think 2 conversations about it, because I brought it back up because I was kind of offended that you had thought, but I think then you clarified that it's a hypothesis. It could be the case,
Right.
and you have to somehow in your mind deal with my testimony and what the Bible says about people shipwrecking their faith and how they've never truly, because the contradiction is Bible.
Yeah, well, it's doctrinal, I'd say, even more, because like you can, and it's sort of, do I read those scripture verses as like colloquial almost? If you say those statements politically, someone was part of our political party, but now they left us. Well, that just shows that they never, truly were socialist. If they really had that heart, then and it's like, you can easily construe it being like that, oh, they never, but if you're talking, I don't know if ontologically is the right term, but if you're talking actual truth of the matter, because the Bible also talks about apostatizing, which yeah, some people try and argue otherwise, but I'd say it's pretty obvious that, well, you really need to have a clear faith in order to apostatize, or else that word makes no sense. And there's also there's a part in things Hebrews 6 verses 4 to 6. I think I remember it because I've been discussing with Calvinists about exactly this. You know, they maintain that if you're actually saved, you will never be
Right.
unsaved, no matter how hard you try.
Yeah.
Well, because if you're trying, then you never really got saved. They're kind of doing it that way.
Yeah.
But you know, in Hebrews 6, it says something like, "It is impossible for those who've once been enlightened and who've tasted of the heavenly gift, and then turn away, to be brought back to the faith again." And like that language to me is pretty unequivocal that like it is possible to leave the faith after.
Yep. No,
Yeah.
that's a good example.
So I would think that it's possible to truly experience God, have a relationship with Him, and then turn your back, or be dissuaded. Yeah, this is still something I'm kind of working out because I'm, you know, Mike Maeshiro.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he came out as gay the other week.
Really?
Yeah,
Oh, how interesting.
and so he's like really leading that whole conversation,
Oh.
putting out a bunch of stuff, and I like, okay, I'll need to revisit this now.
Yeah.
So I've been having conversations with Elizabeth Woning, with some people here at my church, and obviously engaging with the material Mike's putting out, and just like, okay, yeah. So there's one video that just came out where Mike and his team are just having a roundtable discussion about each of their individual journeys of like dealing or processing this stuff, because they're now, as a group, as a movement, they're LGBTQ affirming and celebrating. So like they've each had to go on their own separate journeys. So I'm really like interested in hearing exactly that. Um, all this to say that like the whole, that was one question I had for Elizabeth, is like, because you remember at BSSM they taught us like, you know, if we ask for a fish, we won't receive a snake. It's like it's God is more able to keep you than the devil is to deceive you. That whole thing. And so I asked her, and she wasn't quite as convinced on that. Like if we do have certain, what you want to call them, certain things that are really important to you, more so, or like kind of equal with God, you know, and this isn't a condemnation necessarily, you know, it's like people can have, well, if God's doesn't give everyone the opportunity to repent, then that's not a God I want to follow. And then some are like, no matter what God says, I'm going to worship Him. And you know,
Right.
Stephen Fry's famous thing is like, I'm not going to worship a God who allows certain evil things to happen. People have different cutoff points. And so if someone says, I can't worship a God who makes me suppress my sexuality, then that's, you know, that's my, it's tempting, and I kind of want to call it an idol, because that's literally what an idol is. It's something that you place higher or more valuable than God. So just I feel like it's an accurate term. It's just so loaded.
Yeah.
But yeah, so if an experience is your idol, if logical coherence, and that's what I'm suspecting with you, at least that was how it started out, was like,
Yeah.
you know, I can't really square all this in my head. This doesn't add up to me. You have the problem of evil and stuff. And so like, yeah, if that's, if it doesn't make sense, then that, and I can sort of follow that. Like if all the doctrines, there were like so much dissonance in like trying to have a Christian worldview. If there was too much, I would probably also be inclined to think this is bogus, something that people came up with. But I really don't see that much. Obviously, there's some, but and there's also like the fruit I see from people actually following this, and the straight up like supernatural events that accompany those kinds of lives. I'm like, okay, I still wonder about all the prayers even these people pray that don't get answered. That's a little, yeah. But then there are definitely other prayers that are. That's way beyond just, it's random happenstance. Yeah, so I'm like, okay, this is, yeah. So if people have idols, then even though they have real God experiences, they can apostatize.
Yep. Yeah. No, I think so yeah, for me it was the logical coherence. It was problem of evil, it was hell,
Right.
Eternal condemnation. It was also God's
Well, you were
ontology.
into annihilationism for a bit and universalism.
Yeah.
So hell should have been kind of, but that probably already put in a huge amount of doubt and like.
Yeah, because universalism. Well, I'd also at that point, I no longer held to believe that the Bible was the inspired word of God in any way.
Right.
For me, the Bible was completely human conception. So that, yeah. And so it was those things. It was also, God's ontology. So I had the idea about how can a being that has everything be motivated to do anything. That one still is one that I haven't really gotten an answer to.
I thought the whole wanting a limitation was your answer to that.
Yep.
But you're not satisfied with that answer after all?
Yeah, I think I wasn't. What was the idea? So God is everything except limitation. So he creates limited beings. Yeah. Yeah, that was good. But still, the maximal properties of God had a lot of inherent contradictions for me. So his being all knowing is being, because why does he then, even though he creates limited beings and he wanted, why does he interact? Because he still has no motivation to interact with them or that kind of thing. My idea was then that we all are just one of his
many
thoughts.
dreams. Yeah,
one of his many dreams, exactly. So yeah, well, it was all this. Well, but what's interesting? So I never really I think in that time I didn't think about your argument of, okay, people are living these lives that are just really like good compared to maybe people who aren't living with God. But that was not I think that was also not my experience at the moment, because I was getting texts from Christians every week asking me to go out for coffee because they wanted to hear about my Bible school experience, but actually they wanted to convert me back.
Was that your experience when you talked with them also? They weren't listening at all?
Yeah, they actually weren't. Yeah, they were just there to convert me. I don't remember any. Yeah, and that was all from the church here.
Right.
I don't. Yeah, I didn't have I didn't have a single good experience. I think I can't remember. So yeah, that was not my experience. What?
You had me.
Yeah, I had you. Yeah, no, you were a good experience, and my dad was a good
There you go.
experience. But yeah, so my general experience of Christians was not arguing for that point.
Sure.
And the miracles I was also explaining, because I still don't find miracles.
Yeah, right. That's
very
true. You
convincing.
stopped. Well, because you did have your like leg thing for a bit, right?
Well, I've seen, but that's the main one that I've like actually incontrovertible. That was not natural.
Okay.
So um,
So you
and
just
I'm
leave
not
that out to mystery, right?
Well, yeah, I'm fine with, because that was also part, I think, of the logical coherency, was that agnosticism is better than
Yeah,
refraining from judgment is better when you don't have conclusive,
sure.
evidence. So that's my miracle thing is, well, yeah, sure, miracles happen, but it doesn't point to any specific God.
It's Christopher Hitchens thing, right?
Oh, I don't think he believed in miracles.
Nobody is saying I even grant you these
Oh,
miracles,
right.
grant you, then that still doesn't point towards your God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's probably Christopher Hitchens, yeah. Oh yeah, I remember the debate that was the panel with the. Yep, yeah. So was still my miracles thing. So well, okay. So um, maybe back to the emotion, the
Since
the presence experiences. So when we were at BSM, we were kind of overloaded with that. So yeah, it was the question. Okay, should it be pursued?
Mhm.
At the moment, for me, we're reading a philosophy about a lot about the aesthetic life, and
Mhm.
so aesthetic education is a term that will come up. And aesthetic education is the idea that people have to develop a sense of appreciation for things, for aesthetic things like art, beauty, music, being in awe, emotions, all these things. And I've recognized that over the past year in my own life that I used to be all about this rationality, and now it's like, oh, there's much more to life than deductive arguments and being always logically sound and
That's such a great statement. There's more to life than deductive argument.
so and then I had those God experiences, and so it's like, okay, well, maybe religious terminology can be valuable in.
Because remind me, what came first? Was it the God experience or like the appreciation for aesthetics and spirituality? Because I remember you did try drugs after the God experience, right? Because you had the one thing
Yes.
where you like came back to an old place in
Yeah.
Holland and like knelt down in the middle of the square. That was before,
Yeah. That was before drugs.
right?
Correct.
So
And I
what
also had
what
another God
what
experience.
happened first, or like what started that whole? Because you
Um.
were just purely irrational
mm,
driven for a while, and then what was
yeah.
the second?
So I had two of those God experiences. So the one was where I knelt in the square. The other one was after I Skyped with a girl from BSM, Mary Grace, and
Mhm.
then she encouraged me to let go of my actually this whole thing, the aesthetic.
Mhm.
She educated me aesthetically. She told me to let go of all my rational arguments and see if I could connect with God. So I did that right after that talk. I sat in my chair and was like, okay, I'm gonna put every. It was this huge struggle. Like
Right.
but then when the arguments, were dampened enough, then God's presence came, like very strong. So I had those two experiences, but those were both in the context of, okay, I have to put my rational arguments
Right.
aside.
Right. Right.
But then when you, yeah, I think then the next experience was on drugs probably.
Mhm.
And that's where you don't really have to put your rational arguments aside, because it's all just there.
Mhm.
There's no rational arguments to be made against those experiences.
Right. Well,
So
that's actually, if I can break in right there, that's sort of been my experience with like God stuff as well. I don't need to turn my brain off. And
mhm,
I noticed this when I've like received prayer for healing, for example, when someone's prayed for me, I'll, kind of, I feel like sometimes I should now just, you know, meditate on I'm gonna be healed, I'm
yeah,
gonna be healed, I'm not gonna. And then it's like, no, if God heals me, that's gonna happen. And I don't want to be like so mystical about it that
mm,
like, oh, it's my particular brainwave focal point. It's like I the way I see faith now is like it doesn't you don't have to eliminate all pondering,
mm,
but it's more about like, okay, how do you act? How do you choose to view things? Because like I see doubt
mm,
within these, I'm thinking now of Peter coming to Cornelius, and he's still like, what did you want me for? Like, what is really,
mhm,
like, he hasn't turned off anything. He's just like, well, okay, but I am gonna go with these guys, even though it's breaking Jewish law to interact with, to visit the house of a Roman. But I'm like, okay, my faith is causing me to do this, but he's not turning off his brain in the meantime.
mm, mm,
And even, in the midst of fire tunnels, I'll like, or I guess I would switch back and forth a bit of just like, well, I'm just gonna
yeah.
give myself over. But for me, it's been important just for my integrity's sake that
Mhm.
yeah.
Well, for me, this is part of why the aesthetic education is so useful to me. So, and religious terminology. So for me, there would be a middle road between the sort of doubting, pondering, like trying to be active with your faith
Mm,
and God there when you're being prayed for, and also the just being like, oh no, I can just chill, and if God's gonna heal me, then He's gonna heal me. For me, the
mm,
middle road would be um, uh, like engaging with. So if you actually have faith that God's gonna heal you, for example,
mm.
um, you could imagine you'd be like at least like joyful, like what the heck, I'm gonna get healed by God, oh my
Yeah,
God,
yeah,
and then
sure.
you get into that mode. It's like, so if you actually had the faith, it's not even a like you're not pondering and like trying to make it. It's like, oh my God, he's actually gonna heal me
Yeah,
right now. It's
yeah, yeah.
crazy.
Oh, that's great. Because it's
So
real. It's not a manufactured spiritual persona.
yeah,
You
it's
know,
actually real. Yeah.
yeah.
And so that would be, I think, the perfect way to approach things like fire tunnels,
Mm,
or worship. It's like, oh my God, we're actually gonna meet God here. You know,
right.
it's not, oh, is God actually gonna come, or should I do it? Like, how much of Him, how much of me? It's like, no, it's like, oh, awesome, God's here, let's go.
Yeah,
You
no,
know,
that's good.
so it's just immediately engaged.
Right.
For me,
Totally.
that's the aesthetic life, and that's why. So yeah, it's exactly what like rational arguments don't really. That's not what's happening in an aesthetic experience. Um, what so
I
what's
have those
happening is
during aesthetic experiences all the time.
or what do you mean?
Yeah, so I'm like pondering, is this actually happening? Is this some? And then
Right.
I often laugh, chuckle to myself that like I'm still me, I'm still this
Mm,
critical thinking, and I'm just amused by it. And then like, oh, should I be? And then like, that's childish worry.
mm, mm. Yeah. Well, but you'll have those thoughts in the middle of the experience. So, um, because yeah, that's also what happens on drugs. Like you'll be there, and then you'll come back to yourself and be like, "Wow, really? Am I doing this? This is
Okay.
so weird." Uh, yeah. Um, but with like, for me, I had this discussion yesterday, so I've had it a couple times now about the term God,
Mm,
and we have had this conversation. So for me, that term God is really appropriate to such experiences. I've been listening to that Bethel song. Oh, that's actually the one that I sent. Or is that the one I sent you? Wonder on the Make Me Brave, You Make Me Brave album. That always got me so.
Is that the Kelly thing? May we never lose our wonder.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And then when it goes to that bridge thing, you fascinate me, you fascinate me, you
Right.
fascinate us with your love to our. Yeah, that part always just gets me, and and it gets me consistently.
Yeah.
So for me, the best description of that is that's God's presence, because that's how I remember it from my Christian life as well. And I think that's an appropriate term, even though I don't. Well, I've been having a harder time saying I don't affirm that God exists. It's only that autonomy thing that we've been discussing that I can't come to grips with.
Okay.
But
What autonomy thing?
that it's actually some being like you and I, that's not a pattern that's always existed, but it's actually like an instantiated being at the moment who's interacting with me. That I can't, although I'm so close, right? I'm like right on the edge, because what I am saying is to personify God is the best way to relate to him. So
it's
I'm right there. Yeah. Well, it's entirely pragmatist. Yeah. Oh, and so then to the question, well, is there a physiological difference between when God is really there and when he's not? To me, that's not even a question. Like, no, there's no physiological difference. Because it's they're exactly the same except for the terminology that you use for the experience.
Okay.
Oh, and about idols. So I have some idols in my room, right? The Hindu
actual physical.
Actual idols. The Hindu god. So, and what's interesting to me, I think I said this to you. When I pray to the Hindu god.
What does that look like? What does that mean?
Have I never shown you that? The idol?
I remember you're talking about getting like satanic symbols.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I wanted to get that for a while to reintroduce the religious.
Gosh.
But I got this for Christmas. I must have shown you it, maybe not.
Of course you did.
Because I asked Teresa's family.
A bear or a tiger?
Yeah, tiger.
Tiger.
This is a Hindu god. Why am I blanking out on the name?
Shiva.
No. Durga Devi. So her role, that's why I wanted her, is to protect Dharma for people. So, and Dharma is, your task in life. That's that which you were made for to do. And her role is to protect that people are able to live that out, because when you live that out, you acquire moksha, and then you're reunited with Brahman. So I thought that was really, because Dharma has been, I think that's one of the coolest concepts in Hinduism.
Sure.
But so sometimes I'll pray to this God, but it feels different than when I pray to the Christian God. And so when you said like, secular music, how some can just like feel inspired. But then you don't think that, it's actually the Holy Spirit that is categorically separated that song. I think that's correct, because it's not the Holy Spirit, it's some other God, right? Because it's not a Christian song. So it's like some secular God. Maybe you could think of something that's related to the song that would be the God that's hovering on that song. So I really like this approach, because for me, it's the Christian God is like, and he's almost, he's like on Brahman level. He's the ultimate god, just a monotheistic, maximally great being. So relating to that is obviously different than relating to the protector of Dharma, because that's what she is, right? The protector of Dharma. She's not the maximally great being. So, and for me, this has been amazing. Like, that's why I really like idols. Is they give you a much broader experience of all the divine that there is to experience and engage with. And so you theologically, maybe you could call them like all aspects of God. That would be fine. That's what a lot of Hindus do. They say, okay, all the millions of gods, they're actually just a reflection of an aspect of the one God.
So to try and have a parallel of this would be like you really enjoying, liking, and worshiping and focusing on Charista's cooking ability and not her. Dismissing her for a while.
Yeah, if she's cooking and then you focus on, wow, I really appreciate this cooking. Yeah, that's sort of an aesthetic experience.
That's fine with her to not. Why can't you just focus directly on her, like the whole picture?
Yeah, so I would say then you're kind of missing out on what there is to be experienced in the immediate. That's something, because
Well, you can appreciate an aspect of someone without like honing in and like closing your eyes off to everything else that they are.
Well, when I'm worshiping this God, I'm not closing my eyes off to the Christian God, for example.
It sounds like you are.
Well, because I am. But isn't that kind of life? Like, we're always having specific experience. We're never like relating to the whole. When I'm studying my leadership and coaching course, I'm not. Well, I'm still studying psychology, my main bachelor, but I'm studying leadership and coaching at the moment. Like, and even beyond that,
I don't think psychology would get offended by you focusing it on. But
exactly.
But when it gets relational, when you're talking about a relational, being like Charista or like God, then it's not the same to like isolate aspects of them.
No, I think it's fine. Like yesterday, Sharista gave me a compliment about my verbal abilities.
Sure.
And I was like, I really liked that.
But she gave it to you.
But it was about a very specific aspect. So she was worshiping, a specific aspect of me.
I do that with God all the time. But I'm still addressing him.
Yeah, but that would be the theological claim, that when you're addressing this God, you're basically addressing the main God, but just an aspect of them you're focusing on at the moment.
But you did say you were not praying to the Christian God, but
yeah. So for me, that doesn't work that way. But you could work it out that way theologically. For me, that's not, because for me, again, like, God isn't someone who gets offended. Like, by definition, even if he is a person, he is not someone who gets offended. So, but for me, he's not a person. So then, definitely,
that's what I'm like. Inside all of this, I'm like, you don't believe there is such an entity anyhow, because I'm thinking like we touched on some really interesting points throughout this talk, and like actually not been too like inside our own stories and worlds and discussions. It's actually been quite general, so I'm like, oh, I'm thinking I might send this to someone, but like, you don't actually believe in this God protecting Dharma existing.
No, well, I believe in it as a pattern.
You believe that it's helpful in structuring the world to perceive it that way.
No, I believe it actually structures the world. So there is an
but
impulse.
It only exists insofar as Santa Claus exists.
Yes. Well, no, it exists. Yeah. Well, okay. So I rewatched the the Horsemen of Meaning episodes and some other John Maeshiro stuff and John Vervaeke stuff. So I misunderstood because you asked me, what was there? Oh, we went into the question of what is there before human consciousness, and I said, well, maybe there's nothing, but because everything you think of before human consciousness is always you're thinking of it through the lens of human consciousness. So why is there, like, how can it? But that's not what they were saying. They were saying there are, the least that there is patterns, because well, that's currently where at least Peterson and Vervaeke say that the psychological evidence is pointing to at the moment is that we're not perceiving objects. We are for the objects are sort of the interpretation that are put upon the patterns so that we can easily interact with the patterns. And so they give there's this study with babies where babies will be put on a glass panel.
Yeah.
You know this one with the cliff.
Yeah.
And then when they reach the cliff, even though they're on a glass panel, so they keep walking, but they stop, and it's because they know what it means. The falling off place means, so they know what the cliff. They know what it would mean if they kept further. They know they would fall, even though they're not. They can't be reflecting about it or thinking. It's just there, so they perceive the pattern of death, falling off place, and so they stop.
Well, or they continue if their moms are smiling.
Oh, okay.
So like,
I don't know.
what they test there is like, well, so putting a baby in danger. I think it's a social referencing, and they look to like their parent, or I guess they've only done it with moms. And if the mom looks scared and frightened, then the baby will, map that onto their seeing this cliff and okay, this is something that's probably bad. But if the mom is fine and encouraging, then like, okay, this will probably be okay. So they'll keep walking across the glass
I
panel.
haven't read the study.
I just saw a video of it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because what these guys are saying is they didn't mention the mom. They just said like the baby inherently, intuitively knows that a cliff is a place that they'll fall off. So
Because
they'll stop.
they've perceived heights before.
No,
They
like they haven't. So it's the point. Like it's
These
inherently in
aren't
there.
newborns. These are babies who can crawl.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so
Yeah,
they've perceived
they
heights
know
from
how
their life.
gravity works. Yeah.
Right. Mm.
So
Yeah.
I'm with what they're saying,
Well.
that like babies know what will happen.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I mean, it's even just the whole embodied cognition side of it, where we'll what we see maps onto our motor cortex before we even think about it. So, when you're going to grab your keys, your hands immediately go the way that it goes to grab your keys.
or even if you just think of a key, someone says
Yeah.
a key, like those same motor neurons start like prepping.
Yeah. So the idea is that there's no objects. The objects are there because of our interpretive system. There's patterns, and that's reality exists in the interaction between the patterns and consciousness. But so the patterns existed. That's what they say before human consciousness.
Really? The pattern of grabbing a key existed before keys existed.
No, the longest it's that transcendental reality that persists over the longest of times. That definition of God that Peterson gave. Those patterns, patterns of, he says, for example, patterns of trees existed way before humans.
Okay, but trees didn't. I mean,
Well,
the
not
term
trees as
tree
we think.
certainly didn't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there was, if there were human, yeah. Yeah, well, you can imagine it just as trees, because if there were human consciousness, we would have interpreted it then as trees. But because it's they're not actually objects; there's just the patterns that they are.
They're not
That's
actually
what exists.
objects.
Well, they become. Well, we make them into objects, basically. That's our
We
interpretive system.
perceive them as objects,
Hmm.
but uh, a tree wouldn't behave or have any different characteristics if a human weren't around to perceive it.
Hmm.
Every other animal organism, physical law would interact with it in precisely the same ways. So the events that would happen would be exactly the same if a human was there to observe it or not.
Yeah.
Yeah. What are we adding to it by perceiving it other than, having a formalized structure through which to um, codify, I guess, which to make sense and formalize systems of patterns.
Hmm.
Like we're not adding anything other than a systematic structure of understanding.
Okay, so just of understanding, not of perception, you would
We're
say.
not adding any like we're perceiving it through our own biases, through our own lenses, but we're not affecting the tree at all.
Yeah. So we're not affecting the tree, but the tree, like the ding an sich of the tree, is not necessarily the object that we are perceiving. The object is Peterson calls it
Yeah,
an
we're
icon.
perceiving the physical attributes of it, perceiving
Um,
its weight, and it's like we're not perceiving in itself because that's inconceivable in any like
mhm,
it's impossible for us to perceive anything without bias.
mhm.
It's not just that humans are so limited, but like in and of itself, perception implies, yeah, it
Mhm.
implies putting stuff into other kinds of patterns. We
Mhm.
perceive a tree in line with us previously perceiving grass or previously perceiving air, and like we contextualize everything relative to other things. It's
Mhm.
impossible to view just one thing without bringing any prior knowledge to bear on our perception of it.
Although that's more even about the interpretation of the what we're
Yeah,
perceiving.
that's what I'm saying.
So,
That's the only thing we do.
oh yeah, yeah, I'm talking even about the perception. So the structure that a tree takes when we look at
Yeah,
it.
what do you mean by that? The structure a tree takes?
Like literally the confines, the yeah, literally the structure. So like you're looking at your computer screen, it's a rectangle,
Mhm.
but it's
It's
not
not a
rectangular in
rectangle.
the ding on sich. Yeah, that's our
Yeah, because it has rounded corners and
no, but even that is not like it's not actually an object. Our brain is saying, okay, here's this pattern.
yeah,
How do
we're
we translate
categorizing it.
this? Yeah, like it's where everything is just categorization. That's our perception. Yeah, it's like just categorization of everything,
Yeah.
of all these patterns. So there's you can imagine it's um uh yeah, it's like a language you've never read. I don't know if this is a good analogy, but like a language you've never read. There's all these strange symbols, and then you're going to start to extract it out into a language that you know.
Mm.
And then there's this whole different thing. So this is the object, the new language that you've construed out of that pattern, out of the patterns that you've observed. But the patterns are not those structures, right? It's the new structural of the language that you've now put it into. It's not an entirely good example because the first one is still a language, so it still has its own structure and patterns,
Yeah.
physical structure and patterns.
Well,
But
I think it's useful because like if I see Chinese characters, I'll see literally, lines and da 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 da, da, and I can try and analyze. Oh, here's like a random ink blotch over here. Is that part of it? No, probably not. Or I'm really looking at, the physical aspects of it. A Chinese speaker would just see meaning,
mhm.
would see language, and I'm like, there's no language here. It's just patterns.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So he would have a systematic understanding of it and see a speaker
Mhm.
behind it. Whereas I just see physical shapes.
Yeah. Although he's probably still associated with language.
Yeah,
So when we
probably.
see those kind of written
Well,
down
because we see
symbols,
it's clearly not random.
yeah, and they're symbols in ink, and that's usually associated with
Sure.
language. Yeah. So the idea is it's just patterns, and then so with God and the what were we talking about before that, the idols,
Hmm.
whether God exists.
Has autonomy.
Yeah, yeah. So for me, it's the God is the right terminology to describe some of some of those patterns that we engage with, that are patterns that are like universal and uh, things that bring us towards better versions of ourselves or better life or all these things. God is the that's the proper that's the definition. Yeah, that's the definition of God.
What's
So
your definition of God?
well, it's also for many believers the definition of God, right? The being or the thing that brings you into a better life, better relationship with yourself, all these things.
Really?
I think everything
I think
would
that's
map
many
onto.
Christians' primary definition of God.
No, not their primary definition, but that's
Yep.
definitely an aspect of God.
Sure,
So,
I can go along with that.
yeah, yeah, and yeah. Yeah, but we're talking about the idol thing and uh, whether it's okay to for God to worship just an aspect of Him rather than the whole being at once. Yeah, for me, it feels like it expands my experience of the divine when I relate to other gods or experiences, aesthetic experiences outside of the Christian God. Let's
Yeah,
say.
an interesting parallel, because obviously I feel like I'm not misconstruing you and saying like having this idea, this Hindu god, and like having that you can conceptualize, okay, now I'm uh, going directly towards, the Dharma protector.
Hmm.
Like I think of the Israelites out of Egypt, and
Hmm.
they're like, they wanted something really practical. They
Yeah,
wanted
exactly.
something really, and so they made the golden calves. And it's
Yeah.
like, so I think it's very much part of the Christian worldview that like people have this innate sort of, wanting to put something in that place of worship.
Hmm.
Um, but it seems like God is saying like, okay, that's not good.
Yeah. So I wonder why he says that,
Yeah,
or
well,
why he
I
does
think
that.
it's because it becomes something limited. Like you're worshiping this aspect. You're just, you're focusing on um yeah, I'm not quite sure. like you're steering your affection maybe towards something separate from you, rather than something being sounding very pantheistic here. Rather than like an all-encompassing Lord, you know.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah,
I
so the
don't quite
idea,
making sense.
no, that makes sense. So the idea
Let's
there
start
is
there.
that it's, well, to me, what I get from it is that the hypothesis is that it's always better to focus at the basically the unknowable absolute than at specific, or however you'd want to define, you
Well,
know.
it's not good to focus on something limited.
Yeah, exactly. So it's always better to, that's the hypothesis then there. It's always better to focus on the, yeah, so the unlimited rather than the limited.
Well, and also like seeing, a golden calf, you assume certain attributes,
Mm,
and you assume bovine features.
mm,
When you're looking at this, humanoid god, um, and the tiger, you've subtle or less subtle assumptions about, like, well, their strength and fierceness and empathy, and you're sort of um, putting attributes on this thing you're worshiping that might not be there.
yeah. So the danger might be that, for example, in India where cows are holy,
Mm.
so that might be a danger that you translate something, you know, from something metaphysical to the natural that's not appropriately translated that way. Um, so, for example, if I would, well, because I worship this god, then I would look at tigers as though they're holy, and I'm not allowed to, you know, I don't know. But the cows is a better example because they're more, they're less aggressive to human beings. So, but that you have to stop in the street for a cow, and they have to be able to walk everywhere and do everything and stuff. Like that's not very useful for society. So and that can come out of that sort of specific worship of a limit of contextualized beings as gods, you know, with cows or with tigers. But I could also see it that there could be a positive to it where um, I'd get much more appreciation for tigers because I'm worshiping a god who sits on a tiger.
Yeah.
So there's so I could see how
But
there's
all
those.
this is like practical. All this is, how can I maximize my life here? It's not
Because I
anything ontological
yeah
existence.
well because I think that's the primary function of religion is
Right.
to
You don't,
structure life
yeah.
according to it most well.
It's a instrumental
Mhm. Well, it's
exercise.
fundamentally instrumental. Religion is
Yeah.
supposed to be fundamentally
I'm
instrumental.
saying that it's no, it's uh,
Mhm.
to try and be it's scientific. It's trying to say something true,
Yeah,
something ontologically, verifiably, empirically true.
but what's the value? What's the added value of it being ontologically true over it just being the best description of, you know, best pragmatic description of life?
Well, I feel like that's what the scientific endeavor is. Exactly what you're saying. I don't feel like you're saying it's not the best description, the most accurate description. Accuracy isn't part of your primary value system, but rather
Well,
usefulness.
but it's accurate when it's useful. It's accurate.
No, it's
So,
when it's
uh,
accurate, it's useful.
yeah. Well, they're kind of they're the two sides of the same coin. So
You
they're
could have,
accurate in promoting. Yeah, that's not exactly the right, but
yeah.
yeah, accurate in promoting human well-being. For like the most accurate way, if you want to like, yeah, it can be used like that. I think the most accurate way towards human well-being is, for example, well, ideas of the Christian God and that kind of stuff. Well, that's and then because of all these things that we've just outlined, like the dangers of um, worshipping limited beings and that seeping over into the natural world in a way that's not helpful. So then, so that's not the most accurate way of approaching life if you want maximal well-being.
Most accurate way of approaching life. Yeah, if you're wanting, I feel like you're appropriating the term accurate.
Yeah, but it can be
to
used.
try and
It can
like
be used in that way.
integrate them when I feel like very simple look at the world shows many areas where accuracy and usefulness don't see eye to eye. Often new scientific truth is disruptive in the short term and semi-long term, but useful in the very long term.
Yeah, so I would be thinking about useful in the longest terms. So,
but all your or many of the arguments you're putting forth are in the short term, like within our lifetime.
no, I'm trying to figure out those patterns that are useful across the longest terms that we can relate, and then how we can relate to those.
And you're trying to use your own logic to gauge their usefulness and thus how true they are. And I'm saying we need objective measures, we need, scientific method, we need critical thinking and going away from our instincts to try and really separate out what seems right and what's actually right. And you're saying that no, what seems right because of our intuitions that are millions of years old and therefore likely to find truth. Right.
I'm not sure I'm saying that entirely, because I am trying to refer to gods that have existed for a long time.
Well, except they don't exist as I would say they exist.
Yeah.
They don't have ontological.
They've been present in the world. Yeah, but they haven't. Yeah, they don't have ontological.
Patterns.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
You can just as well talk about attributes as you can talk about beings. I think attributes would actually be better if you change your language to say that, just for our conversations, because that removes the autonomous nature of these beings while still preserving their value.
Yeah, although it makes it's less of a story,
Sure.
But the story is what's valuable to me, because that's I'm not relating to an attribute of being. Well, I'm relating to an attribute of being, but to personify it is still the better story.
Helpful to just like hack your
religious
consciousness to actually. But isn't it? But you see how that's not accurate?
Well, if that pattern is a persisting pattern, then my relating to it in the pursuit of increasing the well-being in my life, that's an accurate.
Well,
that's an
but
accurate approach to life.
You're actively deceiving yourself.
No. Well, this is kind of why I haven't fully rejected the try it truth model, because I still think there's some use. But I've recently just started calling it doublethink, that you George Orwell doublethink.
Yeah.
Because I think it's better. But I don't view doublethink as inherently bad.
Right.
That's what we do in life, and the one is to find the scientific part of the doublethink coin is what helps us discover the patterns. But then the other side is, well, these are the discovered patterns. I'm engaging with them. That's the other side of the coin. So without and then without affirming it. Well, because it's not even without affirming that they're an autonomous being, because that's what exactly what you are affirming on the doublethink, but you're not affirming it on the other side of it,
Yeah.
on the scientific side of it. So yeah.
So which part of the thought is what you actually believe?
No, I believe both.
Yeah,
That's
but
the
like,
whole doublethink. Yeah, for me, there's no contradiction, which is exactly the doublethink definition.
yeah,
Like you see, there's a contradiction, but you don't affirm it as a contradiction.
yeah,
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm doing. Like there's this contradiction between me saying, okay, it's an autonomous being that I'm relating to, but it's actually not an autonomous being that I'm relating to.
yeah.
But yeah, that's not a problem for me. That's the justification of religion. Like
Which is
that's
so
what religion.
interesting because what started this whole journey was God can't be logically coherent.
Hmm. But yeah, yeah. Although this isn't logically incoherent to me, right? I'm not affirming it as a. I'm seeing there's a. Or what
You're
is it then?
saying A is B and saying A is not B. That's like the definition.
Yeah, but
But
I'm not. But doesn't it say like I'm not affirming it as a contradiction or something?
well, you're choosing to ignore it,
Right. Yeah.
which you
Well,
can choose to do about hell and the problem of evil.
I'm thinking if there's maybe a difference between the two autonomous beings. So we're now pretending as though they're both like A equals A. So I believe there's an autonomous being I'm relating to, but I don't actually believe there's an autonomous being I'm relating to. So uh, yeah, what you say, A equals B and A does not equal B.
Mm,
But it's more like A equals A and A does not equal A.
sure.
So because if it's A equals B, or no, if it's A does not equal B, then it's fine. So if the autonomous being that I believe in is not the same as the autonomous being that I don't believe in,
Okay,
you
so
see,
what's the difference
see what I
between
mean?
these autonomous beings?
Yeah, that's what I'm. So the one is a pattern, and the other is an ontologically is sort of yeah. Maybe this is the crux of it, because so one of them is the pattern that I'm relating to. So the pattern exists, and
So just got it. That's such a Jordan Peterson movement. I
oh
love
yeah,
it.
yeah, I've definitely inherited that from him. One of them is the pattern. The other would be this sort of three-dimensional, scientifically spiritual thing. That whole discussion that we had.
Right, about so-called physicality.
Hmm. Yeah. So, although, yeah. So, but then there the problem is if it's just a pattern, then how is it autonomous? That was the.
Yeah,
And what if I just say like that's the best language to relate to that pattern, or that's the best approach to that pattern to perceive it as a to relate to it as an autonomous being.
right.
Then even though it's just a pattern, because it's the best way to approach that pattern, it's fine, but it's still not ontologically three-dimensional, spiritually physical being. So
Right.
is if that's the difference. But yeah, then it's what you're saying. Then you're just kind of confusing, or then you're kind of just deceiving yourself if you have to call this thing that's not actually an autonomous being in order to best relate to it.
Mm.
Then you're just kind of deceiving. Yeah, but is it really? That's just pragmatic deception, which is not like if that's everything.
So,
Yeah, so then it's fine. It's a pragmatic approach to the world then.
Right, but Jordan Peterson's argument would be that, well, then you don't actually believe in, like, what he says to the atheist. Like, no, you don't actually think you are just, random chemistry happening. What you actually believe is you're a theist. How you're actually relating to the world is what you actually believe.
Mm-hmm.
And you can interpose, I had a term for this the other day. It's like a technical worldview or something, as opposed to like your actual. Um, so like your the system you're choosing to view the world on, and versus how you actually view it.
Yeah,
Just like how I say I don't understand. I haven't looked into the details of evolution, but I find myself instinctively trusting it.
Yeah. That I used to say of Christians, like a Christian is someone who would affirm in language, like with their words, with their head.
Yeah, and that's just
the
not
Nicene
true.
Creed. Well, so that would be the technical worldview.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's like what James talks about, like, okay, you think there is one God. Well, so do the demons, and they shiver. You fool, don't you understand that such a faith can't save you? Like, it's a dead kind of faith that just believes something in theory without actually having it affect their lives. So the thing that affects and guides and steers your life is the thing you actually believe. The other thing is the false thing, the deception. So it seems to me like you're saying you actually believe, or you choose to believe that these are actual beings. And then you have like this skeptical thing. I don't know why you
this
maintain it.
rationalist.
I don't know why you maintain that belief if you don't live by it.
Yeah, it's the rationalization behind the approach. It's a pattern, but it is actually a pattern, but it works best when I relate to that pattern as though it's an instantiated being.
Right, and I don't see why you wouldn't just go fully into that.
Yeah, that's why I'm saying like I'm on the edge in some sense, but well, I don't go fully into it because of reasons I've said before, where as soon as you start making it like truth claims, it's an actual. As soon as you make those religious, because I'm already making a truth claim with the patterns, right? So, but as soon as I make it a specific religious truth, that's when then division starts to happen. I think that's the danger of instantiating gods. Well, that's the whole Christian idea as well.
The pursuit of truth involves division, because you're dividing something true from what's not true.
But not when it comes to God. Well, God, the only thing that God divides, that God, the limit that God separates itself from is instantiated versions of himself. So, yeah, that's what he, is all. That's the whole idea, is that don't instantiate me. I'm uninstantiatable. Right?
Except you got to think about him instantiated.
Well, yeah, I would say, but like the Christian God, I don't think of, when I relate to the Christian God, I don't think of him as like a god on a tiger, so not physically instantiated in any way. So pure pattern, basically. So Christian God would be pure pattern, I guess.
Well, pure being.
Yeah, pure being.
Huh. You don't see it as tiring at all to have like these blatant anti.
So for me, it's enriching. So far, I've seen it as enriching because I get to relate to all these, to everything basically. Like I have a skull with a snake running through the skull over there. It's really, really cool. I was in a store with a Gothic section. It was the first time in my life that I felt drawn to a Gothic section, like anywhere. And I stood there for a while and I just bought that thing.
Yeah.
Like that's open to me now. So it feels like it's enriched my life and
Well, certainly stimulating. Like
yeah,
what the eyes want and what the brain wants, and like in Christian views, this the flesh, and so it feels good
and for
to.
me it's aesthetic education.
Sure.
It's no, but I think
Well, it's
it's
certainly spirituality.
yeah, because I do think this is where this is then a dangerous tendency for Christians, because it's also abstract, because it's so uninstantiated, because it's literally just abstract being, right? The Christian God. It's not a God with weapons sitting on a tiger. There's nothing instantiated to it. So it's so abstract that it can separate you from the realities, the fleshly experience, and that's the whole point of Paul. Like, don't engage with the flesh. That's, I would say, no, like engage with the flesh and the spirits. They're like almost intertwined. Like they're the same thing to me in many ways.